Let's start with something fundamental. What are the differences between variables and functions in JavaScript?
Variables hold data. Think of them like labels attached to boxes with values. Functions, on the other hand, are reusable pieces of code, like machines. You feed them input and they give an output. Variables store. Functions perform actions.
Great! Can you explain hoisting, bindings, and closures?
Hoisting is when JavaScript moves declarations, variables, and functions to the top of their scope before execution. Bindings just mean how the name in code refers to a value or function. A closure is when a function remembers variables from its creation context, even if that context is gone, like carrying a mini backpack of variables around.
How does the React virtual DOM combined with the fiber tree enhance performance?
The virtual DOM is a lightweight copy of the UI tree. React updates that quickly, then compares it to the real DOM and makes only the necessary updates. Fiber is React's engine. It breaks updates into small chunks, prioritizes them, and keeps the UI responsive even during heavy tasks.
What are the advantages of using hooks and custom hooks in React?
Hooks let us use state and lifecycle logic in functional components, no need for classes. Custom hooks let us extract repeated logic into reusable functions. It's like sharing recipes. Once you write it well, you can use that hook across different components, keeping code clean and consistent.
Okay, explain use memo, use callback, use ref, and use reducer with an example.
Use memo caches a value so heavy computations don't rerun unnecessarily. Think of it like saving a cookbook result instead of always recalculating. Use callback gives you the same function reference between renders so you don't cause needless child updates. Use ref lets you store a value that persists across renders and won't trigger re-renders, like a sticky note. Use reducer. Great when logic is complex. You define actions and a reducer function to manage state transitions, like a traffic controller organizing state updates.
Okay, let's continue. Can you tell me the differences between functional and class components in React?
Absolutely. Functional components are plain JavaScript functions that return UI elements. They feel light and simple. Class components are older, built with ES6 classes, and they have more structure, like built-in lifecycle methods and internal state. Nowadays, with React hooks, functional components can do almost everything class components can, but in a cleaner and more modern way.
That's correct. How do you manage state flow in a React application?
There are several ways. For local state inside a component, we use useState or useReducer. For global state shared across many components, we can use Context API or libraries like Redux. It's like deciding whether you need to keep something in a single room, local state, or pass it around the whole house, global state. Context API is built into React. Redux is third-party, but offers more control for larger apps.
Well said. What is the Context API, and how might it be a simpler alternative to Redux?
Context API lets us create a context that stores values. Then, any component that subscribes to that context can use those values directly. No need to pass props manually down many layers. Redux can do the same, but it's an external library with more boilerplate and complexity. For smaller apps, Context API is lighter and easier to use, making it a great, simpler alternative.
That is precisely. How do you ensure accessibility in React applications?
Accessibility means making apps usable by everyone, including people with disabilities. In React, we use semantic HTML elements like button and label, add area label attributes so screen readers can understand content, and ensure proper focus management. We also test with keyboard navigation and tools like Lighthouse to catch accessibility issues early.
Good. You have pretty solid understanding. Okay, let's move further. JS coding problems involving objects or arrays. How do you approach them?
My approach is to first understand what the problem asks for, like finding duplicates or sorting items. Then I write logic to handle that, usually using array methods like map, filter, reduce, or using object lookups for fast access. I test with sample inputs, debug any issues, and optimize only if needed.
Great! Clarity is key. Can you explain how React's reconciliation process works when updating the DOM?
Sure. In React, when something changes in our UI, React doesn't directly go and change the actual web page, real DOM, immediately. Instead, it keeps a copy of the DOM in memory called the virtual DOM. When there's an update, React creates a new virtual DOM and compares it with the old one using something called the diffing algorithm. It checks which parts have changed and only updates those specific parts in the real DOM. This process is called reconciliation. The benefit is performance. Instead of repainting the whole page, React makes surgical updates so our app feels faster.
Tell me, what is code splitting in React and why do we need it?
Code splitting is like packing your luggage for a trip. You don't carry your entire wardrobe, you only pack what you'll need. In React, instead of sending all JavaScript code to the user at once, we break it into smaller chunks and load them only when needed. This is important because if you send a huge bundle of code to the browser at once, the page will load slowly. By splitting code, the browser loads faster and the user gets to interact with the app sooner. React supports this through React.lazy and Suspense, as well as bundlers like Webpack. For example, if a feature is on a different route, we don't load it until the user actually visits that route.
How do you handle forms in React, especially when the form is large and complex?
React gives us two main ways: controlled components and uncontrolled components. In a controlled component, every form field is linked to a piece of React state. So when the user types, the state updates, and when the state changes, the UI updates. This gives us full control over what's in the form and allows things like real-time validation. For large forms, I prefer using libraries like Formic or React Hook Form because they manage the complexity, improve performance by reducing unnecessary re-renders, and make validation easier. Controlled components are great for small forms, but for big ones, these libraries save time and keep the code cleaner.
React uses a one-way data flow model. What does that mean, and what are its advantages?
One-way data flow means data travels in a single direction, from parent components down to child components through props. This is the opposite of two-way binding, where changes in child instantly reflect in parent and vice versa. The advantage is that it's easier to track where changes are coming from, making debugging simpler. Imagine a water pipeline. The water flows in one direction, so if there's a leak, you know where to look. In React, since data flow is predictable, we can avoid messy, unpredictable state changes, and it makes our app easier to maintain.
If your React app is becoming slow, how would you optimize its performance?
First, I'd identify the bottlenecks using tools like Chrome DevTools or React DevTools. Once I know which components are re-rendering too often, I'd use techniques like React.memo to prevent unnecessary re-renders of pure functional components. For expensive calculations, I'd use useMemo so they only run when needed. I'd also use useCallback to prevent recreating the same functions every render. If lists are big, I'd implement windowing with React Window, so only visible items are rendered. Lazy loading routes and components is another optimization. In short, I'd focus on reducing unnecessary work so the browser only does what's needed for the user at that moment.
Can you explain what React Fiber is and why it was introduced?
React Fiber is a complete rewrite of the React core algorithm that helps React efficiently update the UI. In earlier React versions, rendering was synchronous. Once a task started, it had to finish before moving to the next. This could cause UI freezes for heavy updates. Fiber introduced the idea of breaking rendering work into smaller chunks and prioritizing them. Think of it like a to-do list. Urgent items like user input get processed first, while less important work like animations or background updates can wait. This makes the UI feel smoother, especially for big applications.
What are React fragments and when would you use them?
React fragments let you group multiple elements without adding extra nodes to the DOM. Normally, JSX elements need a parent tag, so people often wrap things in divs, but this can clutter the DOM with unnecessary elements. With fragments, you can write h1, title, p, paragraph, end quote. This renders both elements without any extra wrapper. It's useful in places like table rows, where an extra div would break the structure. Fragments keep your DOM cleaner and more semantic.
What are React portals and why are they used?
React portals let you render a component's output into a DOM node outside of its parent component's hierarchy. For example, modals, tooltips, and pop-ups often need to be visually on top of everything else. If you keep them nested inside deeply structured components, CSS and Z-index issues can occur. With portals, you can render directly into a div ID modal root that sits next to your main app root in HTML. This way, your modal can appear above everything while still keeping its logic inside your React component tree. It's like living in your own apartment but hosting a party in the building's common hall. You're still part of the building, but you're in a special space.
What are higher order components, HOCs?
A higher-order component is a design pattern in which a function takes a component as an argument and returns a new enhanced component. HOCs are used to reuse component logic. For example, you might create an HOC to handle data fetching or authentication that can be wrapped around multiple components, providing them with the same behavior without duplicating code.
Describe a scenario where you would use a ref.
You would use a ref, short for reference, when you need to access and interact with a DOM element directly. This is an escape hatch from the declarative nature of React. Common use cases include managing focus, text selection, or media playback, triggering imperative animations, integrating with third-party DOM libraries that aren't built for React, accessing the value of an uncontrolled component.
That brings us to the end of the technical discussion. Do you have any questions for me?
Yes, I'd like to know how I did in today's interview and if there are areas where I could improve.
You did quite well. Your explanations were clear, and I liked how you approached problems step by step. For improvement, you could work on giving slightly more concise answers when the concept is simple, but overall, very strong performance.
Thank you for the feedback. I'll work on that.
It was nice speaking with you today. Our HR team will get back to you regarding the next steps. Expect to hear from them within a week.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Have a great day ahead.
You too. Thank you.